I see that we have quorum, and I call this meeting to order. The first motion before us is, we have a motion that is presented by Councillor Ribyak, seconded by Councillor Durley, that the agenda for the October 21st, 2013 regular meeting of the Policy and Priorities Committee be adopted. Are there any amendments to the agenda? See nothing coming forward. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. First item of business this evening deals with the permissive grant policy update. I have a motion put forth by Councillor Ribyak, seconded by Councillor Durley, that the Policy and Priorities Committee receive the issue sheet permissive grant policy update and recommend to Council that the permissive grant application form be approved. Any discussion on this? Councillor Papp.
Just quickly through you to Madam Treasurer, under the eligibility criteria, just help me, or maybe it's implied there, the incorporation could be a provincial corporation, correct? It doesn't, you're not implying that they all have to be federally incorporated. Some nonprofits are national.
Right, it's just an incorporation.
That they need incorporation, but and that wouldn't preclude them either, because some have not. Yeah, they'd have to be registered. I get they don't necessarily, not all of them have charitable numbers. Do we require them?
No, they could be not-for-profit without a
Okay.
charitable number.
Okay, good, that helps, okay. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My eagle eyes were out again looking at this. So I'm just looking about the town of Pelham does not fund according to this core operating costs. Twice. Another councillor caught that, so.
Madam Treasurer, would you like to comment on that?
We'll remove one of them.
Thank you. So just for clarity then, this is implying, like when I think back, Mr. Chair, to the permissive grants that we've had in some situations, it has been longer term, more sustainable operating funding. So I guess the question is, would the treasurer say that this is a change from what we're doing, or is this in keeping with what we've been doing?
This is in keeping with what we've been doing. There's no funding that's been given to help someone sustain their operations over a period of time. When they apply through the application process, they provide us with details of programs, events, projects and stuff that are ongoing in that year. That is what we look at for assessment criteria to fund.
Okay, so the intention of this, Mr. Chair, is for that. It's sort of a project by project based, the needs for that year. So it might be 1 year a charitable organization might say, we want to do this program, and then the next year, they may not come forward. So that's kind of the intention on this. Is that what I'm hearing from the treasurer?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any further comments, questions? If not, I'll call the question.
I have one more.
Yes, Councillor Papp.
And this is like Law and Order, like a leading question. Madam Treasurer, through you, Mr. Chair, where it gets down to the questions, the permissive grant criteria, just helps so I don't misunderstand what it says. The fourth question down, it says, it's asking the organization, it says, is the majority of the users of the service residents of the town of Pelham? So we have given money to organizations that serve multiple groups across the Niagara region. Doesn't mean the majority of those residents, those people served live in Pelham. They have, I'm thinking of, like, for example, Women's Place. I mean, the majority of their clients don't come from us, but that doesn't preclude them from applying, right?
That's correct. One of the issues that we had last year, if you recall, was getting some sort of proof on what our criteria was, and that was, are you benefiting the residents? And this form has been added so that we can assess based on the information they provide us with.
Good. So what we're trying to do is show us proof and build your business case of who you're serving in our particular municipality.
That's exactly right.
Okay, I'm good with that. Okay, good enough.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Chair, my eagle eyes are out. I would just ask staff to take another look at some of the questions and make sure the wording, the grammar's right and the wording's right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If there are no further questions, comments, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Motion is carried. And next order of business is overtime HR policy. I have a motion put forth by Councillor King, seconded by Councillor Durley. The Policy and Priority Committee receive issue sheet overtime HR policy and recommend to Council that policy S 301-13 overtime human resource policy be approved, and that overtime policy P 301-07 be repealed. Comments or questions? Councillor Papp.
No, go ahead, Councilor.
Councillor Ribia.
Just for clarification, the overtime rate is indicated as time and a half. Is there any circumstance in which the rate would be other than time and a half? Time worked on holidays, time worked on Sundays, shift work, or is it always just time and a half?
Through you,
Madam
Mr. Chair,
Treasurer.
it is double time on Sundays and also during stat holidays.
Councillor Ribia.
The question is, why isn't that indicated in the policy?
It is in the holidays section.
That's Sundays, isn't it?
Am I missing something?
Yeah, when you get down to holidays, paid holidays, it's.
Councillor Durley, bring forth your comment.
Yes, sorry, just an answer to that, if you look at the section that deals with holidays, it is definitely spelt out at double time at that particular point in time.
Thank you. Councillor Papp.
Quick question again. So what you're suggesting is all overtime can only be approved by the director. So those departments that have managers, they have no authority to do that. I'm thinking of Public Works.
At this time, all the approvals are at director level,
that's
so
what I
if
just-
the manager is suggesting that there's some overtime, they still have to get that approval
They
from the
still
directors.
have to get director approval. Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Maybe it's with Councillor Ribia. I'll
Defer to Councillor
cede to
Ribia.
Councillor Ribia, because he probably is gonna
Thank
ask
you.
the same question.
Councilor Durley has indicated, and I'm sure he's correct, that there is indication in the holiday section, quote unquote, with regard to double time. But I'm looking at the policy on overtime, and I don't see any indication within this policy that overtime is ever more than time and a half. And I'm going to suggest, Mr. Chair, that if indeed there is another rate from time to time, it ought to be referenced in this one so that there is clarity and there won't be any issue around why you're paying that rate when the rate according to the policy is something else. There may be another policy on holidays that indicates that the rate would be more, but it would seem to me wise to have that rate in this policy so it's all in one place.
Councillor, are you moving an amendment to the, suggesting an amendment?
I would suggest that amendment,
So you're
Mr. Chair,
moving an amendment.
that all overtime rates that are paid within the town of Pelham are to be found within the overtime policy.
Thank you. Is there any discussion to the amendment? Mr. Mayor?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I guess my question is, we've heard from the treasurer, this is what I thought Councillor Ribbiak was going to ask. We've heard from the treasurer that it's on holidays, statutory holidays, and that's in the policy, and Sundays, but I don't see that in the policy. Where is that in the current policy? Sundays?
It is in the current policy. If you look in the, I think you had a copy of the employment agreement. I did pull it. It's actually in my office, and it does state that on Sundays and on overtime, on statutory holidays, they'll be paid at double time. It was, I
But we
actually have
don't-
it by email that I can send you a copy of.
I don't see it here.
6.1.3, Gary,
In the new policy?
public holidays policy, 6.1.3,
Oh, that's coming up, you mean?
comes up later.
But there's nothing about Sundays, is there?
But what's being suggested by Councillor Ribbiak's motion is that we
here it is.
include those altered rates specific.
We'll add some wording in here.
Okay, so I want comments with respect to the motion to amend. So if not, I'm going to call the question on the motion to amend. All those in favor of Councillor Ribbiak's motion to have this policy amended? Okay. Opposed? Okay, so that motion is carried.
Thank you.
Is there any further discussion with respect to the amended policy now? Because I'm assuming that the policy has been amended to include those altered rates for stat holidays and Sundays. Councillor Durley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like a little clarity on this, because the policy issue sheet gives us 7 hours per day or 35 hours per week or 8 hours a day or 40 hours a week. I'm looking at if somebody works overtime on one day and doesn't, I think this should all be considered after the pay period. Because if in fact somebody works a little overtime on this day and doesn't work a full day the next day, because in future reports down here, there is an ability to negotiate some flex hours. So in fact, if I work 9 hours today, I can work 6 hours tomorrow if that agreement is in place through the CAO and through the manager and all that. So I just wondered if the consideration should be made after the pay period rather than after the day in which the overtime was worked. Does that make sense?
Perhaps Madam Treasurer could fill us in on how that's calculated at the current time.
Yeah, currently, overtime is after 7-hour day, if that's your work day, or 35-hour work week. So the flex time, what they'll do is you fill out a timesheet and you indicate whether you want to bank some flex time or take it out in pay. We can't authorize, we can't make them take flex time only. They have the option of doing either or. Flex time in the way you're thinking is what we do for appointments and so forth, that they might need an hour off at the end of the day to go to an appointment. They make that hour up the next day, so there's no overtime on that in that regard. For regular overtime that's required of the staff, they have the ability to bank that day and get paid out for it.
Okay, but again, someone could work more than 7 hours in one day, but still work only 35 hours in the work period.
No, not currently.
Couldn't do that.
No.
Okay, all right, so it's on a day. Okay, that clarifies it. Thank you.
By day basis, I guess.
Gotcha.
Councillor Ribbiak, I saw your hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for clarification, banking hours is at 1-to-1, overtime is at 1.5? Am I right in that assumption?
Madam Treasurer.
No, that's incorrect. It's at you bank hours at your overtime rate.
Yeah, thank you. Perhaps my question wasn't clear. If one takes an alternate hour off to compensate for the one that was worked, it's not an hour and a half for the hour that was worked in overtime, is it? Or is it just 1 hour that's taken?
Madam Treasurer.
Sorry, just to clarify, there's two separate issues. If there's for an appointment and they're just needing to make an hour up, then that's not at that time and a half, because what they're doing is in essence saying, I need to leave a little bit early today, so I'll make up that hour tomorrow. But when we're asking them and requiring them to work overtime for work that we need done, and they work that extra time in the day, it's at the overtime rate.
Councillor Ribbiak.
Thank you. And there's no opportunity to bank that overtime hour at the rate of 1.5 hours off at some future date?
Madam Treasurer. I think you're saying that
I
they
think,
can.
yes, if it's flex time that you're banking for overtime that you've worked, it's banked at 1.5 hours, and it's kept in a bank, and then you fill out a vacation request or a time off sheet one day saying, I'm gonna use some, say 4 hours from my banked overtime. So staff that are hourly, the town staff, the clerical staff, have the ability to bank up to 70 hours only in a year, and the outside staff have the ability to bank only 80 hours in a year. So after that, it would automatically be paid in overtime payment, because we don't allow them to bank more than that for flex time.
Councillor Ribbiak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That gives me some comfort. There's a limit on it. The vision that I had was the accumulation of hours to the point where one could take an inordinate amount of time off because of the multiplier. But because there's a limit, I'm happy with that. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I have a question. I noticed, if I may, Councillor Papp,
Go ahead.
and it's along this line. I noticed that in the old policy, we had a section that dealt with in lieu time, and we don't have a reference to that in the new policy. Is that just an understood thing that, or should that be incorporated in the policy? I don't see it here, where they have that option.
Of banking their time?
Yeah, I don't see that here, unless I'm missing it.
It's number 6, instead of cash payment for overtime, an employee may choose to receive time off at the overtime rate at time mutually agreed upon.
That's the old policy.
This is, I'm in the new policy here. Hold on. Oh, I'm in the old policy, sorry. That should, it should be clearly stated in here, so I'm just wondering if it's been missed, bringing the draft forward.
Gary, Peter's got some too.
Maybe, through you, maybe be worthwhile to incorporate some of these components in this particular policy statement about banking, and just so we're clear, it's not even so much for ourselves, but it's for yourselves as well. Unless, of course, it's somewhere stated, either in the employment agreement, I don't know if that's in there. Do they mention anything about banking in the employment agreement? I don't remember.
There is no employment agreement at the town. These are, the handbook that we had that was used for employees was just a product of all the policies kind
So we don't
of
have
summarized
anything.
into one. So this would form part of that employee's handbook.
So I guess what I'm suggesting, that then, okay, that's good to hear, because in that case, I would suggest the more we can, how can I say, articulate and make it concise, so it's clear on how these approach, because, you know, banking, payment. So maybe I'd like to maybe send it back to staff, if you don't mind, and just take a look at it and bring it back.
So you're making a motion to refer.
Yeah.
So we.
Mr. Chair, I'd make a motion, or can we do that as staff direction?
Just refer.
You know what, I'll refer it back. I'd like to refer it back. So you can.
That's a wise
Just
recommendation.
get the, just so it's clear, and bring it back to us so we're not, okay, so I so move.
Thank you. Any comments with respect to the referral back to staff?
Oh, I think there's a page missing. I think that it would probably.
Well, if that's the case, you know what, just bring it back. So, big deal.
Call the question. All those in favor? Motion is carried.
So you're gonna say refer to staff?
Thank you. Next item of business is the progressive discipline HR policy. I have a motion from Councillor King, seconded by Councillor Durley, that Policy and Priorities Committee receive issue sheet progressive discipline HR policy and recommend to Council that policy S301-15 progressive discipline human resource policy be approved, and that discipline policy P301-28 be repealed. Comments or questions? Councillor Ribbiat.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I think you'll recall that I emailed a couple of concerns that I had with this policy to our administrator, and so I'll just reiterate them here as concisely as I can. I had two issues, one very detailed one with respect to the issue of insubordination as subject for progressive discipline. Strikes me that insubordination is not appropriate for progressive discipline if an employee is being insubordinate, i.e. refusing to do work which is properly assigned to him on the basis of a lack of authority on the part of his employer to direct him. That's not something you're going to deal with progressive discipline. If that's a persistent view, that's going to lead to termination pretty much with regard to the first instance of that. There is a form of insubordinate behavior, I suppose, that people might get involved in that would be appropriate for progressive discipline treatment. I think you would want to separate that from insubordination as the issue. And I suspect that our administrator may have had some time to think about that and may have some comment to make. I'm not sure. Through you.
Thank you.
Yes, I discussed this with Councilor Ribbiak earlier, that we will change the wording in that section.
Okay. Two. Okay. Mr. Mayor wanted to know too.
What will you change it to?
Just the terminology of what insubordination means and how that would be disciplined in a different fashion than some of the other less severe.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
And the second issue I had was a bigger one, and it had to do with the notion that our progressive discipline policy describes us as taking a, for want of a better term, a negative and punitive approach to issues when they arise. But in fact, a lot of instances in which standards or expectations or rules are breached are not breached because of poor motivation or a lack of a desire to be successful or the town to be successful, but rather because of, well, people are human. Sometimes they lapse, sometimes they misunderstand. And those instances are usually treated, other than with progressive discipline, but with some form of counseling, some training, a commitment on the part of the employee to do differently next time the circumstances arise. And I would suggest that that's probably the vast majority of times when things go off the rails, in the rare instances in most employees' records when that occurs. Sometimes, though, things go off the rails because of issues that are best approached with progressive discipline. I would like to see us take a view in the policy that, in fact, we approach things constructively and positively in a problem-solving way first, but if instances require progressive discipline, here are the steps that we would take. I think that probably represents the attitude of the town management better than a view that we have one approach only to instances of breaches. I think that the risk we run with having only one approach is that indeed if we deal with an instance of a minor lapse in one case through counseling, positive problem solving, things aren't going to happen again, and not with progressive discipline, but the next person comes along, does exactly the same thing, but for different reasons and is disciplined, there's an argument of inconsistency in treatment. So having a policy that suggests that all of these approaches can be used would take that argument away. So I would make I would like to see the town work on some words in the policy that would suggest that progressive discipline, a negative, punitive approach, is not the first thing or only thing that we have at our disposal to deal with issues.
Anyone else want to comment on that particular issue? Councillor Pat.
Just quickly, picking up on what you're saying, if in fact, as part of the development of this HR discipline policy, we looked at best practices, the nature of the administration along those lines is towards positive reinforcement, unless it turns to the situation where the employee is absolutely unable to meet the requirements of the position for a variety of reasons. And I can think of, you're right, Councillor Raby, I can think of several instances in the past and previous life where employees fell down, let's just say, for a variety of, we didn't punish them because they were dealing with some clinical issues or other issues that affected the job. We tried to rehabilitate them. But in fact, at the same token, there were situations where they made an effort to do that, but then repeated it, and the case in point was they had to be terminated. So I guess what you're saying, the raison d'etre, the spirit of this would be that we work towards positive construction, ensuring people follow what was considered to be good working conditions, and where that's not the case, and they do not follow what is considered to be fair and consistent, then it's not unreasonable to state something like that. So I'll leave it up to Mr. CEO and Madam Treasurer, because when I saw that best practices, I thought, okay, you're looking at, and I know the Burke Group, they sort of suggest that as well.
Comment on that?
Just to respond to the councillor's inquiry, I think that what the councillor is saying, well, I know what the councillor is saying is already in our culture. Okay. It hasn't been clearly articulated in sort of the how might be part of it, so I understand that confusion. Second of all, what the counselor is talking about is actually embodied in our performance management program that we're rolling out. So I would recommend that perhaps a motion be made to defer this back, and we can tie those two together and make that statement. The primary reason, just for council's background, that to have this is more from a liability issue, so that if there is a legal challenge, we do have a policy that gives us the ability to discipline, not as a first step, as the case may be, but as a required step.
Thank you for that clarity.
Good explanation. All right, then,
Councillor Durley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just wondering, is there a quote-unquote support system for he who is accused? Because I see here it's a matter of if somebody says he did something, these steps can be taken. The last line of this says the facts and circumstances surrounding each case shall be promptly investigated and reviewed to ensure that employees are treated justly and equitably. Is there something that can assure that the accused or the person who is the subject of discipline will have some type of a support there, or will he have to seek outside help in order to do that? Because in fact, if somebody says he did something and he didn't, there is the element of proof there. And this is the one thing that really bothers me, because there has been false accusations that have developed into some severe consequences, and innocent until proven guilty is the precept. And again, it's the yes, mistakes are going to happen, but I think the person that is accused of doing something has the right to face his accuser.
CAO, do you want to comment on
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to figure how to respond. It's the circumstance that I'm hearing from the counselor would be one that I would have found in a unionized environment, in the sense that, or in the context of a grievance procedure or representation from a union. We don't have that mechanism here. Obviously, we're not a unionized environment. But having said that, I think that there's obviously the, sort of the chain of command, if you will, although I don't like using that. But if there's a disagreement, an employee always has the ability to put something in writing to make a complaint, and then to bring that up to the next level. And it doesn't matter what level the organization is, that ability is there. And that there has been times where I know that I've looked at disciplinary matters and said that they're not fair and rescinded them, and actually removed content from an employee's file that was put there for ulterior motives, not based on actual facts. So I think the protections are there, but they're not formalized as you would find in a collective agreement.
Yes, actually, the roots of this is in collective agreements. However, I feel collective agreement or not, staff is entitled to have some kind of buffer and a protection there, because certainly if there is a difference of personalities, there may be something that is untoward that is placed upon that person that shouldn't be there. I'm glad that the CAO has indicated that he, as a mediator in there, if he sees that this has happened, that he can remove it. However, I want something there to protect that employee, because if an unfair accusation is given and that person has to wear it, that certainly is a scar that's going to be there for life and maybe shouldn't be. So I think there should be some kind of a buffer in there to protect that person.
So perhaps, Councillor Durley, if we refer this back to staff for a rewrite, they could incorporate something along that line.
Yes, and building on what the CAO has mentioned about that extra lever and level of
Oversight.
looking at it, will provide some of that protection. But I would like to see some of that stated in the policy.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is there anyone prepared to make a motion to refer this back to staff? Councillor Ribbiak?
I would refer this back to staff.
Thank you. Any other issues that you want looked at or incorporated with the referral, or we hit on the main issues? Councillor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to build on Councillor Durley's point, I think that the interaction between an employee and his direct supervisor often can be done, should be done, without the involvement of a third party. I think we're referring to an appeal process. I think Mr. CAO has also indicated that. And so if the rewrite is going to include that, I think it's the appeal process that we're trying to address.
Okay, thank you. If there's no other things we want to incorporate in the referral, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Next order of business, that the Policy and Priorities Committee receive the issue sheet, Public Holidays HR Policy, and recommend to Council that Policy S301-16, Public Holidays Human Resource Policy be approved, and that designated holidays policy P301-11 be repealed. And that motion was put forward by Councillor Durley and seconded by Councillor King. Discussion. Mr. Mayor.
Just, I guess just ask the question about the difference. There's different holidays here. There's what I guess there's public holidays, and then there's additional non-statutory holidays. So I think, you know, according to the policy, it says that those public holidays, which are mandated from the province, are double time, whereas the non-statutory holidays are time and a half. So just looking for some clarity around that. Does the Employment Standards Act say that the provincial holidays should be double time and we're choosing then to do time and a half, or what's the Employment Standards Act say?
Employment Standards Act says 1.5 times pay. So there was a council-approved document a few years back that gave double time for stat holidays and Sundays, so we've kept it consistent with this policy. We've actually pulled out the non-statutory holidays as being only at 1.5 times, because in the old policy, they were kind of grouped all together as just public holidays, which they weren't. So this this was to do that housekeeping and separate them out as their own.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks for the information.
Anybody else? Councillor Ribbiak.
Thank you. Just for clarity, just so we get the math right. So somebody working on a stat holiday would receive double time on that day, but have an alternate day taken as well, amounting to 3 times?
No, they just get double time for working that day.
Why read
And
it
there's not another day taken?
No.
Thank you.
Anyone else? No? If not, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. That was quick. Moving right along, we have a motion put forward by Councillor Durley, seconded by Councillor King, that Policy and Priorities Committee receive the issue sheet Training and Development HR Policy and recommend to Council that Policy S301-18 Training and Development Human Resource Policy be approved, and that Professional Training and Development Policy P301-13 be repealed. Discussion. Councillor Ribbiak. You notice I looked at you first.
Well, I guess habits are hard to kill, and bad habits are the hardest. Again, just for clarity, first of all, I understand that this policy has to do with people, with employees looking to upgrade their skills, not as part of their professional credentials, but in their general quest for personal development.
Madam Treasurer.
And I'm very happy to see that. Love to see a slightly higher amount, but I guess the amount there is a competitive one. Perhaps we can direct our question to, or our attention to the eligibility. All permanent employees and full-time employees, part-time employees working a minimum of 21 hours. So part-time employees, we distinguish between 21 hours and above, or 20 hours and below. I just need some clarification with regard to that distinction.
Madam Treasurer.
Yes, the part-time employees that would be working the 21 hours and plus are permanent part-time, and that separates them out from just the regular casual or part-time employees.
So it's permanent part-time. Got it. Thank you. That answers the question.
Further comments, questions? Counselor Pat?
Would there ever be an occasion, and this is on a progressive manner, that if an employee, and notwithstanding any of you, wished to take a leave of absence for professional purposes that was longer, for a month, 2 months, 3 months, would we be open to those types of requests?
A leave of absence for
Well, let's
schooling
say
or?
someone wanted to complete their MBA and wanted to finish it off for 4 weeks. They needed that time. I'm talking about experience I've had in the past where people have come and said, you know, I need to do this course full-time during the summer. And in this other organization, we granted them the time, or in this case, it was nursing people completing graduate upgrades. And they couldn't do it part-time, they could only do it. So would we consider, and I know it's not appropriate, but I'm just questioning, would there be other instances where it's a possibility? I'm thinking of some management programs that Queens were, I'm using you, and I'm not pointing, if we were to send you away for that training, it's 6 weeks. It's gone. You're there for the training. So is it implied here that it's flexible enough to do something like that?
We've dealt with leaves of absence on a per individual basis when they come forward and based on their.
One by one?
Yeah,
So it's not out of the question.
not out of the question.
Okay, as long as it's,
You satisfied with that, Counselor Pat?
yeah, and I think, yeah. The other questions I have are some of the, it's just I'm just not nitpicking, but just some of the stuff I'm thinking, and maybe for your purposes, Mr. CEO, I don't know why, they have to talk to you about it. I'm trying to lessen your job. That I think the directors, if you have the ability to make those decisions on leave of absences, is this for a matter of record? I would think you could, you would be, I would think, dealing with higher, different types of leave of absence as opposed to the normal ones that are requested, that the directors themselves can make those decisions. Don't let me put words in your mouth, but you feel comfortable?
Mr.
It says,
CIO, you want to comment on that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think that the policy states that it would be done in conjunction.
yeah,
And the way that I would interpret this policy is that I would need to be informed if it was going to be something that was longer than, for example,
Okay.
the week specified. Second of all, that I'd want to have assurances from the director that operationally we can fill
You
that
could
gap
fill the
if it's
job.
going to be an extended period
Okay.
of time. So it's more of a consultation
okay,
as opposed to an approval.
approval,
By
good.
me.
That's what I'm looking for. All right, thank you.
Thank you. See any other hands? I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Another one, ring it out.
Carried. Next order of business, I have a motion presented by Counselor Papp, seconded by Counselor King, that Policy and Priorities Committee receive the issue sheet termination of employment HR policy and recommend to Council that Policy S301-19, termination of employment human resource policy, be approved. Discussion. No discussion? Counselor Ribbiat.
Of course, there's some discussion, Mr. Chair. I would like just to bring some additional clarity to an item within this draft policy. Statement is the following minimum notice periods will be observed by the town as it relates to termination of employment, and in that sentence, I would like to include the words termination of employment, but not for cause. Again, just to bring that clarity to that portion. I would move that.
You move that?
Yes.
Any discussion around that point? All those in favor? Okay. Any further discussion on the policy as amended? If not, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of the amended motion? Carried. Motion by Counselor Papp, seconded by Counselor King, that the Policy and Priorities Committee receive the issue sheet nepotism HR policy and recommend to Council that Policy S301-24 nepotism human resource policy be approved. Discussion. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This one's it's a bit odd, I think, in it, and I'd just like to hear some more from the CAO. It's sort of the last line. The policy talks about relatives. It talks about direct reporting relationships in the key facts, and then in the solution statement, it's sort of the last statement. If a reporting relationship exists, you go to the CAO. So just want to hear more about that.
Mr. CAO?
Mr. Chairman, I am not convinced about that either.
Okay.
To be quite frank, this policy was, I think, requested by council because of maybe some specific observations in the past. However, first of all, any human resource professional will tell you that when you're selecting a candidate, it's the KSAs you're looking at, your knowledge, skills, and abilities, and it's not based on who you know, who you're married to, or otherwise that can really get you in trouble. So I'm a little leery about this policy, and from my own point of view, I'm not sure on which approval criteria I would be assessing the situation on. So is there, so I'm just sort of saying yeah or no, yes or no, and what am I assessing that decision on? I don't see there's guidelines there, either sort of in an HR common practice context or specific in this policy. So it puts me at a bit of a awkward situation. And if I was to make a decision on not to hire someone because of a relationship, would that open the municipality to being liable for discrimination? That concerns me as well. So to be frank, again, if I had my way, I would not consider this as a policy or an issue. I would maintain current practice as opposed to the way this is.
Having heard that, is there anybody else want to comment on that, or Mr. Mayor, you
Yeah,
want
I
to
just
continue
wanna-
with
you
the
know,
discussion?
Sort of circle in through that and maybe build on it. I think and look to colleagues on this, but my recollection of the reason we wanted this policy was other municipalities were talking about it, and I think there was concern about the idea of the direct reporting relationship. That's why it's here in the policy. The concern is if somebody is hired for whatever reason and they are directly reporting to a relative or someone who's connected to them, that kind of thing, and it's outlined here. That's the thing I think we have a problem with. If somebody's hired because they're the greatest person, whatever, in another part of the organization, we're not big, but we're big enough that, great people can work in other parts of the organization. I think that's where the problem is. So I guess I would like to see maybe that last sort of paragraph struck and just saying we don't allow, or we don't, I don't know what the proper wording is, but that's where we have the problem with that, if there's a direct reporting relationship. So,
Perhaps before I ask for an amendment, an amending motion, I'll
perfect, thank you.
refer to some of our other colleagues. Anybody else have a thought on that? Councillor Riviere.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I had not planned to speak to this because, in fact, I think that the policy is a pretty good one. I mean, nepotism is viewed in our culture as a negative force. Not all cultures view nepotism as negative. Some cultures would never understand why you wouldn't hire all your relatives and replace everybody else with your relatives. But that's not our culture. Nepotism is generally viewed as a negative thing, and it's viewed with a great deal of suspicion. And I think that it makes a great deal of sense in a corporation like ours, which is in the public eye and which is funded by public dollars, to make sure that any source of suspicion about the way we do business is removed. Nepotism is an easy one to identify, and I would think that an easy one to remove with a policy that clearly articulates how applicants who are related to current employees are going to be treated. And in fact, I thought this policy was a reasonable approach to to how to do it, how to be able to answer the question, well, guy got a job only because of who he knew or who he was related to. Well, no, actually, it's actually dealt with by policy. So I'm not looking for a change to it. I don't know if that helps.
Anyone else want to comment on this?
I'm fine.
Councillor Duran?
Just through you, Mr. Chair, I just have a problem that if Dave's son happens to be the best engineer in the town, and we can't hire him because he's related, this sort of bothers me, and I have to go back to what the CIO said, knowledge, skills, and ability. I think this is the important thing, and if your son happens to be the guy who has these qualities, it would be a shame that we can't hire him because somebody's going to look at it and say we're being dirty. That sort of has a concern for me.
Thank you. Councillor King, I saw your hand.
No, I'll hold back, thank you.
I'd like to speak to this, if I may. I think we either go with what Mr. Mayor put forth, and that is that we either do not allow a direct reporting relationship, or we strike that last paragraph, because as the CAO has alluded to, if it is in fact the most suitable candidate, and then the CAO in turn does not hire that individual, we most certainly are open for a suit. That we did not hire the most suitable candidate, and it was all on the basis of the CAO making a decision. You go through the entire process of interviews, applications, blah, blah, blah. Here's the most suitable candidate, and now, Mr. CAO, because there's a relationship there, you have to make a decision, and you turn them down. To me, that opens up, in my mind, opens us up for a big-time issue. So it's either got to be cut and dried, we don't allow a direct reporting relationship, and we can't hire that individual because of that fact, or we hire the most suitable candidate. And perhaps we need to be aware of that relationship, and those people that are involved need to be counseled on the fail-safe on that relationship. Mr. CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The direct reporting relationship is a very valid point. However, it also extends beyond hiring into a situation where you may have an office romance develop between a superior and subordinate, and then the relationship goes south, and then you've got a problem with a direct reporting relationship where a supervisor, in a bad breakup, may be using his or her position to unduly punish the former lover. I don't know what words you'd say.
That's a whole nother policy,
Spouse.
Mr. CAO.
So all I'm suggesting is that the direct reporting relationship piece is more than just a hiring issue. It's also a policy that you have to look at from within the organization, because it could develop at any time, anywhere, and then how do you deal with it? So.
Councillor King.
Well, that situation could also exist in a promotion where you have, I don't know, a position open elsewhere in a department that person is a relative, and so would you consider them for a promotion or for another position within the organization if they would be reporting directly to a relative? So, I mean, I just believe that there's nothing wrong with the policy itself. It's in the solution statement. I agree that the last paragraph should probably be struck. And that the solution is that the policy or the town has a policy that there would be no direct reporting of relatives.
So a very cut and dried statement.
Just make it clear.
Councillor King, are you prepared to put forward that amendment?
I am.
Could we hear that amendment again? Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor King.
That the town of Pelham, now I can't remember how I said it, but anyway, that the policy state that there will be no relatives directly reporting.
No direct reporting relationship.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. CAO, you want to?
Mr. Chairman, perhaps I might just to ask the council to consider deferring this back to staff. I wouldn't mind having maybe some legal advice on this.
Good idea.
For sure.
Will you withdraw your amendment,
Well, just
your motion?
defer the whole, yeah,
Or defer? Motion to defer?
or refer back
To
to
defer.
staff, yeah.
Okay. Counselor King put forward a motion to defer
Refer it back to staff.
and refer back to staff. No further discussion. All in favor? Oh, Counselor Papp, sorry.
I'm in
Cut you
favor,
off.
and I couldn't agree more, Mr. CEO. And also, talk to the Burke Group, check it out, see how it's worked. Because I was gonna offer that, check out, see what's the best practice. Let us know, and then it's clear. Thank you.
All those in favor of referral back to staff? Motion carried. I have a motion from Counselor Papp, seconded by Counselor King, that Policy and Priorities Committee receive the issue sheet succession planning HR policy and recommend to council that policy S301-25 succession planning human resource policy be approved. Discussion.
I like it.
Counselor Papp.
Couldn't agree more. We've had enough history through this, through many organizations, all of us have, including particularly with this, is let's build on the strength of our team and get these people into place, so in some cases, we don't have to worry about scrambling around. Build the core of this group. Thank you.
Any further discussion, comments? If not, call the question. All in favor?
Whoa,
Three of them.
Read a bag.
That bottle.
143.
A motion by Counselor Ribbiak, seconded by Counselor Durley, that Policy and Priorities Committee receive the issue sheet organ and bone marrow donation leave HR policy and recommend to council that policy S301-26 organ and bone marrow donation leave human resource policy be approved. Discussion. Counselor Ribbiak.
Thank you. First, Mr. Chair, I wonder if I can have some clarification with regard to the last statement and last sentence in the solution statement. This leave will run concurrently with the short-term disability plan the town offers. I don't understand what that means.
Madam Treasurer.
You have a short-term disability plan that details the number of weeks that you would get, but we did put a clause in here that said that this would be paid leave of absence for the purpose of an organ. During the leave, employees entitled to retain their benefits, and it would cover 100% of the employee's salary for the recovery period.
Counselor Ribbiak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So does that mean that somebody who is taking leave to offer an organ is on the short-term disability plan?
That's right. It's just another pay option in the salary.
Then my suggestion would be to find some other words. This leave will run concurrently with short-term disability. I think what we're saying here is this leave is covered by short-term disability.
In a nutshell, yeah.
In a nutshell, right? This concurrently, I don't know what that adds to an understanding of this policy.
And is that an allowed expense in our short-term disability policy?
Can you put it like?
Do we administer the shortterm
We
disability?
administer ourselves.
Okay, so it's in,
We'll change that wording.
yeah, okay. Yeah, I think that would clarify that.
Yeah. So other than that, Mr. Chair, I think this is a tremendous policy. It's a great policy.
Any further comments, questions? Go ahead, Counselor Papp.
Very touched by this, very much. And can't tell you enough that it sends a clear-cut message to everybody about organ donation and how vital it is to a person's life. Thank you.
Call the question. All those in favor?
Great.
4 out of 4.
Ding.
Ding. She likes that. We have a bell.
We should have a bell, clerk. Madam Clerk.
I didn't have the bell. Never mind, Madam.
You would have got it.
Oh, I have the bell. Moved by Counselor Durley, seconded by Counselor King, that the Policy and Priorities Committee receive the issue sheet hiring HR policy updated, and recommend to council that policy S301-7 hiring human resource policy be approved, and that hiring policy P301-32R be repealed. Discussion. Go ahead, Councilor
Thank
Rubio.
you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I note in the issue summary report an indication that this policy now includes references to the town's nepotism and succession planning policies, but there is no such reference in my copy. I believe we may have the wrong sheet in front of us.
Yes.
Yes, as per the email that I sent out earlier today, the policy was deleted and reattached with the correct
Oh,
one.
we just didn't know.
Yeah.
So
So where do we find that, so we can look at it and see how it reads?
Email it to council right now, but it is, I can read it to you.
Please,
This one.
Mr. Chair, to you, please.
Yeah, that'd be great,
Yeah.
but it's been corrected, reference.
It indicates under the hiring to please refer to the town's policy on nepotism S301-24 and succession planning S301-25 for further information.
And where is that sentence found in this, would
Right
be
under
found?
the solution statement under hiring.
Solution
I
statement.
will forward a copy of the,
Hearing. I should just bring it to council.
Yeah, can we just
bring it back?
refer the correct policy to council, and then we'll just look at it there?
That's fine.
Would that,
I'm making the motion to that effect, Mr. Mayor.
yeah, I don't know how we do that, but essentially saying, we don't have this, so we can't make judgment on it, so just refer it to council and have the policy there, and we can look at it when we look at these minutes.
Refer it back to staff and then ask that they bring it directly to council.
Yeah, refer it to
refer
council.
to council to the next meeting.
Okay,
Good idea.
I'll make that motion.
thank you. Discussion around that? Okay. Call the question? Okay, so we're gonna refer it to council.
What's a half day?
Okay. Motion by Counselor Papp, seconded by Counselor King, that this regular meeting of the Policy and Priorities Committee be adjourned until the next regular meeting, being Committee of the Whole, scheduled for Monday, November the 4th, 2013, unless sooner called by the mayor. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Ding.
Ding, 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 ding.
Ding, ding. This meeting is adjourned.
Like the casino.